Welcome back to HOA Consequences. The board called it compliance, and I called it extortion. Stop arguing and start shoveling, or I will schedule your hearing. Angela Carter stood in the middle of my driveway, with her arms crossed and her hood pulled tight against the sleet, blocking the path to my truck. Behind her, a plow berm the size of a small car sat steaming in the January cold, courtesy of the city crew that had just finished the street. She pointed at the berm and then at me. "You caused this. You obstructed snow removal. I am escalating to towing for winter operations." I held up one hand. I did not cause anything. The plow driver dumped that 3 minutes ago while I was inside. Angela shook her head hard enough to send sleet flying off her pink parka. "Your windshield cover violated vehicle appearance standards and created confusion during emergency clearing. That is a covenant violation. I am issuing a fine, and I am putting your vehicle on the tow list if you do not comply immediately." I work as a pest control technician in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I keep detailed service logs for every property I visit. That habit saved me more than once when clients tried to dispute invoices. I moved into Pine Hollow Community Association 6 months earlier because the rent was reasonable and the location put me close to my route coverage area. The HOA had a reputation for being strict, but I figured I could handle a few extra rules about trash cans and lawn care. I did not know that Angela Carter, the rules interpretation chair, treated every weather event like a personal mission to catch someone breaking covenant fine print she claimed to have written herself. The windshield cover was a basic silver reflector I put on my truck the night before because the forecast called for freezing rain. Angela decided it looked too visible from the street and violated the aesthetic standards for parked vehicles. She left a notice on my door at 6 in the morning. I pulled the cover off and tossed it in the bed of the truck. I thought that was the end of it. Then the plow came through and left a berm blocking my driveway exit. Angela appeared 30 seconds later with a clipboard and a camera phone, claiming I had caused a safety hazard by forcing the plow to maneuver around my truck. The plow had been nowhere near my truck. The driver dumped the berm in the standard spot at the end of every driveway on the block. Angela did not care about facts. She stepped closer and jabbed a finger toward the berm. "You have 1 hour to clear this completely, or I am calling the tow company. And you still owe a fine for the windshield cover. That is $50 for the first violation. If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." I took a breath and kept my voice level. The plow just left. I did not create this berm. The city did. Angela smiled in a way that made my stomach drop. The city works with us during snow emergencies. We coordinate on enforcement. If you refuse to comply, I will notify them that you are non-compliant and they will support the tow. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the berm, the street, and Angela standing in my driveway. She noticed, and her smile got wider. "Go ahead, document your non-compliance. That will make the hearing faster. I am trying to refinance my house, and any lien threat could wreck the deal." The bank wanted clear title and a clean HOA account before they would approve the new terms. I had been working on the paperwork for 2 weeks. Angela knew about the refinance because she had access to HOA records, and she made a comment about it at the last board meeting when I asked about a payment plan for a previous fine I disputed. She told me that non-compliance would delay my closing and that I should take covenant obligations seriously. That was when I started recording every interaction with her. I did not announce it. I just kept my phone in my coat pocket with the voice memo app running whenever she showed up. Legal in Alaska as long as one party consents, and I was that party. Angela turned and walked back toward the street, pulling a small bucket with a cracked lid from under her arm. She set it on the curb and pointed at it. "This is the salt you were supposed to spread yesterday. You did not. That is another violation. The bucket was not mine. I did not own a salt spreader, and I had never seen that bucket before." I told her that. She ignored me and took a photo of the bucket with her phone. I have photographic evidence of non-compliance. You are not the first person I have corrected, and you will not be the last. She picked up the bucket and walked toward her car, a white sedan parked 2 houses down with the engine running. I stood in the driveway with sleet soaking into my coat and tried to figure out what had just happened. The Pine Hollow Community Association rules treated winter operations like a military exercise. Every household was required to clear walkways within 4 hours of snowfall, spread salt or sand on any icy patches within 6 hours, and maintain a snow-free buffer zone extending 3 feet from the property line into the street. The rules also stated that vehicles could not obstruct snow removal equipment, and that any appearance standard violations during a declared snow emergency would result in doubled fines. Angela loved to declare snow emergencies. She did it every time the forecast mentioned accumulation. The board gave her unilateral authority to issue emergency notices and schedule immediate compliance hearings. She used that power constantly. I went inside and checked my email. There was already a notice from the HOA with Angela's name in the from line. Subject: Winter Emergency Compliance Violation Notice. The email listed 3 violations: obstruction of snow removal operations, $50 fine; failure to maintain vehicle appearance standards during emergency declaration, $50 fine; failure to apply ice mitigation materials to designated buffer zone, $75 fine. Total: $175 due within 72 hours, or the account would be flagged for lien processing. The email had been sent at 6:47 that morning, which was 20 minutes before Angela showed up in my driveway. She had written the notice before she even saw the plow berm. She had planned the whole thing. I called my buddy Victor, a contractor who had dealt with Angela twice before and refused to back down either time. He told me to document everything, request copies of all HOA correspondence, and check the city snow removal schedule to see if the HOA actually coordinated with them. He also told me Angela had tried the same salt bucket stunt with another homeowner last year and lost when the guy proved the bucket belonged to a landscaping company Angela hired. Victor said Angela liked to plant evidence and then act shocked when people did not comply with rules she made up on the spot. He offered to be a witness if I needed one. I told him I would let him know. I grabbed a shovel and started clearing the berm. It took 40 minutes. Angela drove by twice while I worked, slowing down each time to watch. The second time, she rolled down her window and shouted that I had 15 minutes left before the tow deadline. I ignored her and kept shoveling. The sleet turned into light snow. My hands went numb. I finished clearing the driveway and checked the time. I had 10 minutes to spare according to her arbitrary deadline. I went inside and sent an email to the HOA board president asking for clarification on the violation notice and requesting copies of all relevant covenant sections and the city coordination agreement Angela mentioned. I got an auto reply saying the president was out of town until next week and all enforcement matters should be directed to Angela Carter. The next morning I woke up to find a new notice taped to my door. Compliance hearing scheduled. The hearing was set for 3 days later at the HOA office, which was a rented conference room at a real estate office near the subdivision entrance. The notice said failure to appear would result in automatic fine confirmation and immediate lien filing. I took a photo of the notice and the timestamp and sent it to Victor. He replied within minutes. She is trying to rush you into a hearing before you can gather evidence. Request a postponement in writing and cite the need to consult with an attorney. I sent the postponement request by email and certified mail. Angela replied 2 hours later, denying the request and stating that emergency violations required expedited hearings under the Emergency Powers Amendment she said the board passed last year. I asked for a copy of that amendment. She said it was in the master document archive, and I could request it through the formal records process. I filed a records request that afternoon. The records request triggered the first set piece. I cited the Alaska Homeowners Association Act and requested all board meeting minutes for the past 2 years, all amendments to the covenants, all correspondence related to winter emergency declarations, and all agreements or communications with the City of Fairbanks regarding snow removal coordination. The statute required the HOA to respond within 10 business days. Angela called me 30 minutes after the HOA office received the request. She told me I was wasting everyone's time and that I could review documents during normal business hours at the office if I scheduled an appointment. I told her the statute allowed me to request copies and that I wanted electronic copies sent by email. She said the office did not have a scanner. I offered to bring one. She hung up. Victor showed up at my house that evening with a box of documents and a grin. He had requested records from the HOA 2 years earlier during his own dispute, and he still had copies of everything. He spread the papers on my kitchen table. Meeting minutes, covenant amendments, budgets, violation notices sent to other homeowners. He pointed at a page dated 8 months earlier. This is the Emergency Powers Amendment Angela told you about. It never passed. The board voted it down because the HOA attorney said it was unenforceable. Angela tried to push it through anyway by adding it to the website rules page and pretending it was official. 3 people caught her, and she had to remove it. Victor tapped the page. She is doing it again. She is pretending the amendment exists so she can rush hearings and skip due process. I made copies of everything Victor brought and added them to my evidence file. I also found something else in the meeting minutes. Angela had been warned twice by the board for harassment behavior related to enforcement actions. One warning came after she trespassed on a homeowner's property during a dispute over a fence. The other came after she sent threatening emails to a resident who questioned her interpretation of the parking rules. Both warnings included language stating that further violations of professional conduct standards would result in removal from her committee role. Angela had ignored the warnings. The board had done nothing. The city announced a snow route enforcement window starting the next morning. Main roads and emergency routes would be cleared with 0 tolerance for parked vehicles. Violators would be towed immediately. Angela sent an email to the entire HOA distribution list stating that the city enforcement window applied to all Pine Hollow streets and that any vehicles parked on the street overnight would be reported to the city and towed at owner expense. She included a line about how the HOA was coordinating closely with the city to ensure compliance. I called the City Public Works Department and asked if Pine Hollow streets were included in the enforcement window. The clerk checked and said no. Pine Hollow was a private subdivision, and the city had no jurisdiction over internal streets. The enforcement window applied only to city-maintained roads. I asked if the city had any coordination agreements with homeowners associations. The clerk laughed and said the city did not coordinate with HOAs on anything. I asked for that in writing. The clerk sent me an email confirmation within an hour. I forwarded the city email to the HOA board and copied every homeowner on the distribution list. I explained that Angela had misrepresented the city enforcement window and that residents did not need to move their vehicles unless they were parked on a city-maintained road outside the subdivision. I included the contact information for the Public Works Department so anyone could verify. Angela replied to the entire list within 10 minutes. She said I was spreading misinformation and that I was jeopardizing the safety of the community by encouraging non-compliance. She said the HOA had a direct line to city enforcement and that I would be held responsible for any towing costs incurred by residents who listened to me. She also said I was in violation of the Community Harmony Clause for creating confusion during an emergency. That was a new one. I had never heard of a Community Harmony Clause. 3 neighbors called me that night. 2 thanked me for checking with the city and said they were tired of Angela making up rules. 1 said I was causing trouble and that I should just pay the fines and move on. That neighbor was on the HOA board. I asked him about the Emergency Powers Amendment and the Community Harmony Clause. He said he did not know what I was talking about and that I should direct all questions to Angela. I asked him if he had read the covenant documents recently. He said he trusted Angela to handle enforcement because she knew the rules better than anyone. I asked him if he knew Angela had been warned twice for harassment. He said that was confidential board business and hung up. The hearing was scheduled for the next evening. I spent the afternoon organizing my evidence. City email confirmation. Victor's documents showing the failed amendment. Meeting minutes showing Angela's warnings. Photos of the plow berm with timestamps. Voice recordings of Angela's threats. I made 3 copies of everything and put them in labeled folders. I also wrote a timeline of events with citations to the relevant statutes and covenant sections. Victor agreed to attend the hearing as my witness. I called the HOA management company and asked if a representative would be present. The receptionist said the management company did not typically attend enforcement hearings, but she would pass my request to the property manager. She called back an hour later and said the property manager would be there. The hearing started 15 minutes late. Angela sat at the head of the table in the conference room with 2 other board members. The property manager, a woman in her 50s with a forced smile and a tablet, sat to the side taking notes. Victor and I sat across from Angela. She started by reading the violation notice and the compliance timeline. She said I had failed to clear snow, failed to maintain vehicle standards, failed to spread ice mitigation materials, and failed to cooperate with emergency operations. She said the fines were appropriate and that my refusal to pay demonstrated a pattern of disrespect for community standards. She recommended immediate lien filing and suspension of my amenity access until the account was settled. I waited for her to finish. Then I opened my folder and handed copies to everyone at the table. I started with the city email. I explained that Angela had misrepresented the snow route enforcement window and that the city had no coordination agreement with the HOA. The property manager read the email and looked at Angela. Angela said the city clerk did not understand the full scope of the coordination and that there were informal agreements not documented in public records. I asked her to provide evidence of those informal agreements. She said they were based on phone calls and that she did not record them. The property manager asked Angela if she had any written communication from the city. Angela said no. I moved to the next document. Victor's copy of the board meeting minutes showing the emergency powers amendment vote. I pointed out that the amendment had been rejected and that Angela had been told to remove it from the website. Angela said the amendment had been revised and approved in a later vote. I asked her to provide the date of that vote. She said it was in the executive session minutes, and those were confidential. The property manager asked Angela if executive sessions were used to pass covenant amendments. Angela said it was a procedural matter. The property manager said covenant amendments required membership notice and vote under the bylaws. Angela said this was different because it was an emergency procedure. I handed the property manager a highlighted copy of the bylaws section on amendments. She read it and made a note on her tablet. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. I pulled out my phone and played the first recording. Angela's voice came through clearly. "You are not the first person I have corrected, and you will not be the last. If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." I played the section where she threatened towing before the deadline had passed. I played the part where she claimed the salt bucket was mine, even though I told her I had never seen it before. I played the part where she said she was escalating to towing for winter operations, and that the city would support her. Then I played the clip I had been holding. It was from a conversation 2 weeks earlier when Angela stopped me in the parking lot near the subdivision entrance. I had asked her why she was targeting me with so many violation notices. Her response was on tape. "You bought a house in my neighborhood, and you think you can ignore the standards I spent years building. I am making an example of you, so everyone else knows what happens when they push back." The room went quiet. Angela stared at me. One of the board members looked at the property manager. The property manager looked at Angela and asked if she wanted to respond. Angela said the recording was taken out of context and that I was twisting her words. I asked her what context would make it acceptable to admit she was making an example of me. She did not answer. Victor leaned forward and said he had witnessed Angela using similar tactics with other homeowners, and that he had documentation of her planting evidence. He pulled out a photo of the salt bucket Angela had used in the violation claim. He showed a receipt from a landscaping company proving they owned the bucket and that it had been left at a different property by mistake. Angela had taken it and placed it on my curb. The property manager stood up. She said the hearing was over and that the HOA would need to review the evidence and consult with the association attorney before proceeding. She said the fines were suspended pending review and that Angela would not be issuing any further violation notices until the board completed an internal investigation. Angela started to argue. The property manager cut her off. She said the management company had a responsibility to ensure enforcement actions were lawful, and that the recording raised serious concerns about bias and procedural violations. She said the board would meet in executive session and that I would receive written notification of the outcome within 2 weeks. Angela grabbed her folders and left the room without another word. One of the board members apologized to me and said they had not been aware of the full situation. The other board member said nothing and followed Angela out. Victor and I walked out together. He told me I had handled it perfectly and that the property manager was clearly unhappy with Angela's behavior. He said the management company would push for consequences because they did not want liability exposure. I thanked him for backing me up. He said he was happy to help and that Angela had been getting away with harassment for too long. We went to a diner near the subdivision and I bought him dinner. He told me stories about other HOA nightmares he had dealt with over the years. It felt good to laugh. 2 days later, I got an email from the property manager. She said the board had reviewed the evidence and consulted with the HOA attorney. The attorney had advised that the fines were not supported by the covenants and that the enforcement process had violated multiple procedural requirements. The email said the fines were being rescinded and that my account would be credited for any payments already made. It also said the board was implementing new oversight procedures for covenant enforcement and that all future violation notices would require board approval before being issued. The email did not mention Angela by name, but it included a separate attachment. Board resolution regarding enforcement standards. The resolution stated that committee chairs were required to follow due process, provide evidence for all claimed violations, and refrain from personal bias in enforcement actions. Violations of these standards would result in removal from committee positions. I forwarded the email to Victor. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a message saying Angela was going to lose her mind. He was right. Angela sent an email to the entire HOA distribution list that afternoon. She said the board had caved to pressure from a problem resident and that enforcement standards were being gutted to appease people who refused to follow the rules. She said the community was at risk because the board was prioritizing individual complaints over safety and property values. She said she was resigning from the Rules Interpretation Committee effective immediately and that the board would regret their decision. The email ended with her catchphrase, "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." The board president sent a reply to the distribution list within an hour. He thanked Angela for her service and accepted her resignation. He said the board was committed to fair and transparent enforcement and that all residents were encouraged to report concerns through the proper channels. He did not address Angela's accusations. 3 other homeowners replied to the list thanking the board for taking action and saying they had experienced similar problems with Angela. One person shared a story about Angela threatening to fine them for having a recycling bin visible from the street. Another person said Angela had tried to claim their porch light violated the lighting standards, even though it was the same fixture installed by the builder in every unit. The emails kept coming. By the end of the day, there were over 20 messages on the thread, most of them criticizing Angela's enforcement tactics. Angela did not give up. She spent the next week sending individual emails to board members and homeowners, trying to rebuild support. She claimed I had manipulated the property manager with edited recordings, and that the board attorney had not reviewed all the evidence. She said the city coordination agreement was real, and that the Public Works Department clerk had given me incorrect information. She said the salt bucket photo was misleading, and that she had documentation proving I failed to maintain ice mitigation. Nobody responded to her emails. The board president sent a private message to the distribution list, asking residents to stop engaging with Angela and to direct any ongoing concerns to the management company. The twist came during a routine neighborhood watch meeting the following week. Angela showed up, even though she was no longer on any committees. She sat in the back and did not say anything until the end when the board president opened the floor for comments. Angela stood up and said the board needed to reconsider the enforcement resolution because it created a loophole for residents to avoid accountability. She said I was a perfect example of someone exploiting procedural technicalities to escape legitimate fines. She said the board was setting a dangerous precedent. The board president thanked her for her input and said the board was comfortable with the resolution. Then the HOA attorney, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. He said he needed to clarify something. He said he had reviewed the full case file after the hearing, and he had advised the board that the enforcement actions against me were not only procedurally flawed, but potentially expose the HOA to legal liability for harassment and defamation. He said he could not represent the HOA in any further actions related to my case, and that the board should consider issuing a formal apology and retraction. Angela's face went white. She sat down and did not say anything else. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and satisfying justice moments. The board met in executive session 2 days later and voted to issue a written retraction. The retraction was mailed to every homeowner in the subdivision. It stated that the winter violation notices issued to me were based on incorrect interpretations of the covenants and city regulations. It said the fines had been rescinded and that the HOA regretted any inconvenience or distress caused by the enforcement actions. It also said the board was committed to ensuring all future enforcement actions met the highest standards of fairness and accuracy. The letter did not mention Angela by name, but everyone knew who it was about. Angela was not done. She started showing up at properties with a camera and a clipboard, taking photos of anything she thought might be a violation. She focused on vehicles, trash cans, and yard maintenance. She did not issue any notices because she no longer had authority, but she compiled a list and sent it to the board president with a memo demanding immediate action. The board president forwarded the memo to the property manager and asked her to handle it. The property manager replied that Angela was no longer a committee member and that her observations did not constitute official reports. She said homeowners who believed they were being harassed by Angela should document the incidents and file a complaint with the management company. 4 homeowners filed complaints within a week. The board called a special meeting to address the complaints. Angela was invited to attend. She showed up with a binder full of photos and printed emails. She argued that she was exercising her rights as a homeowner to report violations, and that the complaints were retaliation for her enforcement efforts. The board president asked her to stop photographing other homeowners' properties without cause. Angela said she had cause, and that the board was ignoring legitimate covenant violations. The property manager asked Angela if she understood that her behavior was creating a hostile environment, and that the management company could pursue formal action if it continued. Angela said she was not afraid of threats, and that she would continue to protect property values. The board president asked her to leave the meeting. She refused. The property manager called the police. The police arrived and asked Angela to leave. She argued with them for 5 minutes before finally walking out. The board resumed the meeting and voted to send Angela a formal written warning for harassment behavior. The warning stated that Angela was prohibited from photographing other homeowners' properties, entering private property without permission, and contacting residents about alleged violations. It said violations of the warning would result in a restraining order and possible legal action. The warning was delivered by certified mail the next day. Angela responded by filing a lawsuit against the HOA, the board president, the property manager, and me. She claimed defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to deprive her of her rights as a homeowner. The lawsuit demanded damages and an injunction forcing the board to reinstate her committee position. The HOA attorney reviewed the complaint and told the board it was frivolous and unlikely to survive a motion to dismiss. He said the HOA's liability insurance would cover the defense costs, and that Angela would probably be required to pay attorney fees if she lost. The board voted to fight the lawsuit. I hired my own attorney just in case. He reviewed the case file and told me Angela had no grounds to sue me personally, and that the recordings were admissible as evidence of her misconduct. He said he would file a motion to dismiss me from the case and seek sanctions against Angela for filing a baseless claim. The final showdown happened 3 weeks later at the gas station lot at the edge of the subdivision. I was filling up my truck after a service call when Angela pulled in and parked behind me, blocking my exit. She got out with her phone recording and started yelling, "You think you won. You think you destroyed me. I am going to make sure everyone knows what you did." I stayed calm and pulled out my own phone to record. Angela stepped closer. "You recorded me without permission. That is illegal. You manipulated the board. You lied about the city coordination. You are the problem in this neighborhood." I let her talk. She kept going. "You are a coward. You hid behind technicalities. You ruined my reputation. If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." I waited for her to finish. Then I said one sentence. "Angela, you are on camera admitting you targeted me personally, and you just repeated the exact threat you made on the recording that got you removed from the committee." Her face changed. She realized what she had done. She stopped recording and got back in her car. She tried to back out, but another car had pulled in behind her. She had to wait. I finished filling my tank, got in my truck, and drove away. I sent the new recording to my attorney and the property manager. My attorney forwarded it to the court with a motion to compel Angela to produce all communications related to her enforcement actions against me. The property manager forwarded it to the board with a recommendation to escalate the harassment warning to a formal restraining order. The lawsuit was dismissed 6 weeks later. The judge ruled that Angela had no standing to sue the board for removing her from a volunteer committee position, and that her claims against me were based on legally obtained evidence. The judge ordered Angela to pay attorney fees for the HOA and for me. The total was over $15,000. Angela filed an appeal. It was denied. She paid the fees in installments over the next year. The board issued a second written warning after Angela tried to attend another meeting and argued with residents in the parking lot. The warning stated that Angela was banned from all HOA meetings and events for 1 year, and that further violations would result in a restraining order. Angela stopped showing up after that. The HOA retracts the winter violation in writing and mails the retraction to every homeowner. Angela gets a written warning for harassment behavior and is removed from her committee position. The property manager files a complaint to the management company that triggers discipline and oversight changes for enforcement procedures. Angela repeats her threat on camera at the gas station, and everyone hears it on the recording I send to my attorney and the board. The board implements new rules requiring evidence and due process for all violations. 3 other committee chairs resign after the new rules make it harder to issue arbitrary fines. The HOA attorney updates the Covenant Enforcement Handbook and requires annual training for all board members. I refinanced my house 2 months later. The bank accepted the clear title, and the deal closed without issues. I got a lower interest rate and saved over $300 a month. I stayed in Pine Hollow because I liked the location, and the neighbors were decent once Angela was not running enforcement like a personal vendetta. Victor and I became good friends. We met for coffee once a week and traded stories about HOA insanity. He told me about a new dispute he was dealing with involving a fence height rule and a board member who measured with a ruler that was off by 2 inches. I told him he should start recording everything. He laughed and said he already was. Angela moved out of Pine Hollow 8 months after the lawsuit ended. She sold her house and left without telling anyone where she was going. The new owners were a young couple with a dog. They introduced themselves to the neighbors and said they were excited to be part of the community. Nobody mentioned Angela. It felt like the neighborhood exhaled. The board elected new committee chairs and updated the enforcement procedures to require board approval for all fines over $50. The property manager started attending monthly meetings to provide oversight. Complaints dropped by half within the first year. I kept my evidence file in a folder on my kitchen counter. I did not need it anymore, but I liked knowing it was there. Victor told me I should write a guide for other homeowners dealing with HOA abuse. I told him maybe someday. For now, I was happy to shovel my driveway in peace and know that nobody was going to show up with a clipboard and a camera trying to invent violations out of thin air. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate your time.